Nothing against the North East, by the way. Let's talk to Katie Perriror, former Director of Communications in Downing Street, because, of course, communications in Downing Street right now appears to be at an all-time low. Katie, very good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I've been asking people for what Christmas list suggestions they might have for this government, and one from Diana here says a Christmas list suggestion for Starmer. How about charisma lessons? He doesn't have much charisma, does he? He doesn't seem to be in the right place at the right time ever, really, does he?
It is harsh and is a tough gig, but you do need to constantly communicate with your audience, whether or not you're here or you're abroad. I think the Metro newspaper today says something like 75,000 miles that Keir Starmer has clocked up in the air since being Prime Minister. Unfortunately, some of those things are planned way in advance. You can't change the date of the Commonwealth Heads of State meeting that King Charles, I should say now, is in charge of in Samoa. Places like that, you have to go. So I think there's probably a few trips that Keir Starmer has been on that he didn't want to go on. But this Saudi visit was a choice, and it was a choice because they needed to get that international investment. And while your previous caller talks about the fact that you send someone along to do your bidding for you, unfortunately, some of these heads of states expect to see the Prime Minister, and so he does have to go. But then you have to make sure that your comms back in London and across the rest of the country are good at the same time. And I think that it's been a real change of pace for the Labour Party that was in opposition, where you run a kind of grid of communications where every week, 1 week it's Economy Week, next week it's Crime Week. Doesn't work like that in government.
Well, look at it. I mean, he's got the approach of a sort of a sixth form teacher, hasn't he? I mean, so last Thursday, ladies and gentlemen, let's reset the government. Except it's not a reset. Don't call it a reset. Whatever you do, don't do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to reaffirm our main missions, and completely and utterly irrespective of what they were. Nobody remembers it. His poll rating's gone even further down the gurgler since then. And what was the point of it?
Well, resets rarely work. It actually worked back in Blair's time. It was quite a revolutionary thing to stand up and talk to people about where you're going, where your North Star is, where you're heading, what your vision is for government. Doesn't work in 2024-25, and so I think that kind of fell slightly by the wayside. But people don't remember these points, and also some of the pledges won't necessarily result in votes because, for example, if you have someone that is facing a knee operation that has an 18-month wait, and that's been brought down with huge amounts of investment from your pockets, from the taxes that you've paid recently and the hikes and things like national insurance, down to something like 4 months. First of all, that person is not going to know that waiting list came down from 18 months to 4 months. They're not going to really appreciate it, and they're still going to have to wait 4 months, which you're in pain, when you need to get back to work, when you need to go and earn more money, is a real problem. So I don't think the votes are there. I don't think suddenly people are going to be waking up saying, well, thank God I got that operation in 4 months instead of 18. They're still going to be impatient for the treatment they need, and they're not necessarily going to thank Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and the rest of the Labour government for making that change. So I'm not sure the votes are there in the way that they think they are, because I don't think that voters think that way when they vote, or think that way in terms of political sentiment.
No, I don't think so. And he is one of the most unpopular Prime Ministers of all time, never mind one of the most unpopular ones in such a short space of time. But a couple of stories that really kind of sum them up, and I think in a bad way. This morning, a great piece in The Sun by Harry Cole about this spouse of cards, as they're calling it, which kind of gives you the idea that everybody in government is so far removed from ordinary people. You know, you've got all these connections between various cabinet ministers and their spouses. You've got John Healey, Defence Secretary, his family member is a civil servant. You've got Jonathan Reynolds, his wife Claire's a number 10 special advisor. He's the business secretary. Martin McCluskey, assistant whip, his partner's a civil servant. Partner works for the Labour Party, Vicky Foxcroft. I mean, the list goes on and on. Angela Eagle, her sister Maria Eagle's defence minister. You know, it's almost like they're a sort of a tribe unto themselves, that only they work for government and only they live in the Westminster bubble.
So I'm torn on this one, Mike, because some of these people I know, and I've known professionally over a number of years, not so much knowing some of their politicians, but knowing their partners in government. And they are really good people in their own right, and they are hard workers, and they are serving the nation, etc., etc. But what it actually says more about, to me, is the Westminster bubble that you refer to. Because the Westminster bubble is a thing. And for many years, I felt that I was outside of that bubble. And when I went into number 10 Downing Street, the fact that I didn't go skiing with these people, that I was not married to these people, that my children weren't born in the Westminster village in some regards, that I wasn't always invited to the dinner parties because I wasn't part of that set, in the end, I kind of got over it and decided to get rid of the chip on my shoulder and took it as an advantage that I might not be the smartest person in the room in terms of going to Eton or Cambridge or Oxford, and I may not have been skiing with him at Easter, but I know what people want at home and I know what voters want. And so that was my argument in the room, that as communications chief, I can kind of stock it to some of these people saying, it's all very well and good. Thank you very much for your 134-page report, but you don't know what voters want, and I do. So that was something that I was constantly pushing. But Westminster is very cliquey. It's very, they go drinking together, they end up marrying each other. It's hard to break into that set. A job that I got, the first ever job I got in politics 25 years ago, was a job at the Conservative Party, being a runner in the press office. Now you've got to be probably a first at Oxford to get anywhere near through the door at some of these places. Social mobility has gone backwards in politics, not forwards, and that's a real shame. So less about the people and who they're married to and things like that, but more about why isn't Westminster more inclusive? Right. In my company, we're mentoring 10 young people to try and get them into politics, get them in, that are interested in campaigning, interested in politics, through a charity called I Have a Voice. And that's really important because, this is more cliquey than ever, and it's really, really hard to break through otherwise.
Right. And it means that in the end, the mainstream parties like Labour and the Tories are just so out of touch, and they get more out of touch because they don't talk to anybody who's actually in the real world. And the reason why Reform are doing so well is because, like it or not, they do talk to ordinary people. They do have communications in the real world. And that seems to me the success that Nigel Farage and his other 4 MPs are getting.
You've got to talk to the right audience at the right time. So you have a business audience, a community of business leaders of 300-400 in the audience. You can talk to them about missions. You can talk to them about KPIs and delivery points and exactly how you're going to be able to deliver on these major challenges, how you're going to be bringing in AI to government to transform the lives of people for the better. That works for that audience. But you shouldn't be bringing in members of the public or thinking that you're going to land that message with voters, because it doesn't really work. They're interested in things like making sure their children are taught to a certain level at school, that they don't have to hold down 2 jobs because one should be enough to be able to afford the cost of living. Food prices aren't going down, energy prices aren't going down. This cost of living crisis that politicians sometimes think is kind of over, it is far from over. Yeah. And that's what people are concerned about. You look to the American elections, my God, there are lessons to be learnt there. There were absolutely lessons to be learnt as to why Trump won, what Biden's team did wrong, how they did not communicate, or they just didn't do enough to put money in people's pockets and to keep prices lower. That's at the end of the day where it comes down to. You can carry on with your missions and your point plans and all the things that you can promise, but if you can't get that right, you're not going to win again. Right.
And more bad news, I'm afraid, for those who would look at them and say, you don't know what you're doing. It turns out they've spent a bucket load of money, all of them, about £130,000, decorating their offices. I mean, they've only been in 5 months. Old Ed Miliband, Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, was the highest spender, racking up a £43,000 bill for renovation, footed by the taxpayer. Angela Rayner spent £16,000 refurbishing an office outside of London. We've got Hilary Benn, Northern Ireland office, spent more than £800 on a sofa. I mean, when are these people going to get the idea that that is not the way they should be, carrying on?
Well, this is a major bugbear of mine, because when I went into government working for Director of Comms at number 10 for Theresa May, about 6 weeks after I arrived, they said to me, we need to know what kind of art you want in your room. Yeah. And would you like to visit the art galleries and choose the art that the nation owns to hang in your massive office? Right. And I said, don't be ridiculous. I've got like 50 things to do today. I can't be choosing art. Just put something on the wall. And in the end, I got rid of it all and asked for one picture of the Queen, because every time I was sitting there thinking, I'm a bit stuck on this one. What would the Queen do? A good reference point. But I'd arrive one day and a new sofa would be put in my office. And I'd say, I don't need a new sofa. And then I'd say, well, I want to know how much that cost. And it would be 5 times, 6 times the price that you and I can go and haggle on Mike for a sofa. I am a haggler. I'm moving house recently. I am the haggler, the Queen haggler, in terms of I've got champagne tastes, lemonade budget. I do not want to spend lots and lots of money on this stuff. But I still want it to look nice. I cannot get over the fact that the government continually does these things. Sometimes the ministers, and in my case, I did not order a new sofa. I didn't know that sofa was coming, and I was really cross that it arrived and it was overpriced and a waste of money. And I didn't want that on my head. I tried to get rid of it and no one else would take it. Right.
Well, it's incredible. How about this, right? Lisa Nandy, who's been talking about a culture of silence at the BBC and moaning about Greg Wallace, she apparently ordered for that department £1,200 on 2 luxury folders for carrying official papers, right? 594 quid from some company which I've never heard of called Barrow, Hepburn and Gale, which is a high-end leather goods company which makes ministers' red boxes. You know, they could buy in the shop, apparently in Parliament, the same thing for about 8 quid.
It is crazy, and there is always waste that goes on across government that blows my mind, and it infuriates me that, you know, national insurance has gone up, my business has been hit. I've got nearly 40 staff in Westminster. I've had to pay a lot more this year, next year, than I would have paid before. It's infuriating when you know that there's waste going on. It's like waste also in the NHS. There's huge amounts of waste in the NHS, and you know, they order things. There's no way of sending it back if it's wrong, so it just stays in a storeroom once. And I remember going on maternity meeting at my local hospital, and I could hardly get in the room because they'd ordered what they thought was 180 gloves, but it ended up being 180 boxes, and it was enough to last them for about 8 years. But they couldn't send them back. They had nowhere to send them back to. So we have to be a lot smarter with the way that we spend people's money in government. And stories like these, where you're ordering new furniture or new files that are ridiculously expensive, it might just be, you know, a fun story, but actually there is a serious problem behind it, which is they don't always spend money like it's their own. If they were self-employed like I am, every penny that goes out the door, I spend it like it's my own money, because do you know what? It is my money.
Yeah, right.
And it is our money. We have bonus pools at work. If we don't make the money, we can't pay out to our staff.
Right.
So, I think people in government should be paying more attention to how they look after money like it's their own, rather than...
Totally. And they shouldn't be buying things that if they were buying them with their own money, they wouldn't even think about buying. Let's get Rachel Reeves, because she's talking about government waste and clamping down. Have a look at this.
I have no doubt that we can find efficiency savings within government spending of 5%, and I'm determined to do so, because it's through finding those efficiency savings that we'll have the money to spend on the priorities of the British people. So part of this spending review will be cracking down on waste, cracking down on non-priority spending, so that we can focus on the issues, whether that's improving living standards, ensuring our streets are safe, or indeed reducing waiting times in the NHS. Those are the people's priorities, and that's what we'll be focusing on in the spending review.
Yeah, not £800 sofas then.
No, look, I think she's right. There are savings to be made. I just want to make sure they make the right savings and they don't cut things that are not important, because it's about choices. Politics is about a scarce collection of resources and how you decide to spend it. I noticed you talked to Robert Jenrick earlier on the station, Mike, around mobile phone theft. But one of the things he didn't refer to was the fact that this is not just a problem in the UK or especially London. It is an international problem when people don't want to come here anymore and don't want to spend their money. So I'm talking to investors in the Gulf states who do not want to come to London, or their wives don't want to come to London because they are scared of being attacked in the street, having their phones taken away from them, or having their jewellery stolen. Right. That money coming to this country that will now go somewhere else. It is not just a problem that we're facing, it's an actual growth problem. We will not grow, we will not employ more people, we will not get more money into the country if people in other countries feel that London and the rest of the country is unsafe. So this is wider than just we're all having our mobile phones nicked and our jewellery nicked, which is horrific. Yeah. And it happened to me not that long ago, and I know it happened to you, Mike. It's more important than that too. It's the fact that people just won't want to come here and won't want to spend their money because they don't feel safe.
Right. It's a very big problem, and I totally agree with you. It's very important to fix that and to make the streets safe, and they keep talking about them being safe, but they're not. Katie Perriror, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, former Director of Communications in Downing Street.